and welcome to Not Supposed to Be Pretty. I'm Kyle Stapleton. This show isn't about the after photo. It's about the construction site. It's about the blueprints we use to rebuild our lives when the old version stops working. For me, that rebuild started with sobriety. That's a massive part of my toolbox. But the work didn't stop when I put the drink down. It actually got harder. I found myself navigating fatherhood, dating, and finding a faith that actually felt real, all while realizing I was still making the same old mistakes. Over the next few episodes, I'm going to be sharing my story with you, sometimes in bits, sometimes in full, to show you how I started to turn the spotlight inward and taking accountability for my part in the mess. We're going to look at the research, we're going to talk to guests who have been through the fire, and we're going to get down to the causes and conditions of why we stay stuck. Because growth is loud, it's heavy, and it's never supposed to be pretty. Let's get to work. I think it might be helpful for me to start with where I'm at in my life currently. On December 12th, 2025, I celebrated 4 years of continuous sobriety and recovery in AA. I just signed my son up for baseball. I'm going to be a baseball dad. I can't believe it. I've been in therapy for a year. And alongside the 12 steps, I have extra tools now for nervous system regulation and to organize my thoughts. Sometimes my brain is a very dangerous neighborhood to be in. So these tools, yoga, breath work, journaling, prayer, fellowship, now, I used to have this mindset that, oh, this isn't going to work for me. I know this isn't going to work for me. I've tried. But what I've found so far in my experience is my degree of willingness to have an open mind to new things directly correlates to the success that I will have. I have hobbies today. I have a sense of identity. I have a $50 acoustic guitar in my bedroom that I purchased off Amazon, and I like to tinker with that. I really enjoy hiking. There's something very magical about getting in the car and driving for hours in any given direction and walking in nature just by yourself, perhaps with a friend, if you can find a friend to go with you. The most notable hiking trip I've taken was to Red River Gorge in Kentucky. For my 34th birthday, I packed up the car, hopped in, and I drove for 9 hours. I spent a couple days there. Talk about feeling right-sized. Nothing will do that quite like standing on top of a mountain, staring out into forever, and seeing just how small you really are compared to creation. And that's what helps me connect with my higher power. A year ago, I never pictured doing any of this. A year ago, I certainly never pictured starting a podcast. I never imagined that I would attempt to use my voice and my experience to help others. So let's backtrack. November 3rd, 2023, a month before I was to celebrate my 2 years of sobriety, I lost my dad very suddenly. 2 months after that, I started a very lucrative job. I'm a registered nurse. I was working in surgery. It was new, it was exciting. I was learning a lot of things that I didn't get to learn at the bedside. However, the hours were long. I think I was working anywhere from 80 to 100 hours a week. I was still doing AA, and I had my time with my son. And I did not stop to address the grief. I did not stop to acknowledge the hole that the loss of my dad left in my heart. I had a misconception about grief. I believed that because I only had happy memories of my childhood and growing up, that was it. It was done. There was nothing left to feel. I didn't realize that I was going to miss telling him about my day, seeing him every morning, hearing his voice, talking about where I was at in life, and sharing moments with him, doing things with him. And I started to become angry. I felt depressed. I felt lost. I had no idea where my life was going. Whatever ideas of a future I had planned seemed to be on hold. I was very much watching the world pass by. And I became angry, very angry. I became very resentful. I became difficult to work with. I got into arguments with my coworkers. I got into arguments with my friends. I got into arguments with people at meetings, people that I loved so much. And then I began to try to fill that hole with a variety of different things. And see, the issue with that is that hole was too big for me to fill by my hands. Something greater than me, a power greater than me, needed to be the answer. However, I attempted to start dating again at 2.5 years of sobriety. And I found that old cycles, old wounds, plus the current weight of what I was carrying was getting dragged around with me. And in December of 2023, I had received my 3-year coin. And if you had honestly asked me how I was doing, in fact, I believe somebody did honestly ask me how I was doing, and I said, I'm just looking for a reason not to jump off the bridge today. Wrapped in humor, but underneath feeling deadly serious. I attempted to date one more time. I had dated from January to March of 2025, and I hit my bottom. Stone cold sober, I hit my bottom. And me and the person, we decided to stop seeing each other. And a couple days after that, maybe 2 or 3, I'm driving to work. It's early in the morning. And I am in so much mental and emotional pain. And I cried out to this power that I was so angry at. Angry at things that I experienced growing up. And it had nothing to do with God at all. It simply had to do with deeply flawed human beings that were just trying to do the best they could with what they had. And I'll get into a much deeper description about all of this And the long and short is that that God that I was so angry at met me right where I was and exactly how I was. And AA has been the launch pad for my life. It has given me so many open doors to walk through. And thankfully I have, was friends with somebody who had been into therapy and they suggested it. And one thing I found in my experience is my exact degree of willingness to have an open mind about trying new things is going to directly influence whether or not I have any success. And I went into therapy, and it wasn't my first time in therapy. I had gone to therapy as a kid. I'd gone to therapy in my 20s. However, because I had been in the program for 3 years, because I was taught to be thoroughly honest, this time it was different because I was willing to take a look at myself. I started journaling. Journaling is a beautiful tool for me. It really helps me organize my thoughts. Sometimes they swirl around in my head and it can look like a giant ball of yarn. And I began to dig in and began to go back as far as I could, back to when I was a kid growing up. And I found a lot of patterns. Patterns that I couldn't see before. Patterns that just had not come to the surface, even though I had done multiple personal inventories. And I found that with steadiness and persistence and continuing willingness, continuing to have an open mind, I was able to start addressing a lot of those old cycles and a lot of those old wounds. Because see, I was carrying around buckets of rocks that I didn't know how to put down. I didn't even know I could put them down. I had resigned myself to believing that I was just going to carry them for the rest of my life. And one by one, I started putting everything down. I got lighter. And I started to feel calmer, and I started to feel more relaxed, and I started to feel more peace. And I finally got to talk about the gravity and the weight of what the loss of my father had done to me and what my experience had been. And I got to talk about how I showed up in friendships. I got to talk about how I showed up in relationships. I got to talk about my fears, and I got to talk about my goals and what I wanted for myself. And it continues today. It doesn't stop. I grow a little bit more each day. And it's messy. If you had asked me last year where I thought I would be a year from now, I don't know if I would have been able to answer. I had mentioned at the top of the episode that it's nonlinear. And that's true. Because doors can still close. I lost a job in October. And it's interesting because when a door used to close, I used to just sit by it. I would be too scared to get up and move forward. I would be stuck in resentment. I'd be stuck in self-pity. I would point the finger at everybody else. And when that door closed and I lost that job, it was painful. I'm still a human being. But it was painful for a much shorter amount of time. And the next day I got up and I got right to work, and I updated my resume and I began filling out applications. I had to take so many phone calls. It's amazing how few full-time jobs there can be in healthcare. But luckily, with persistence, I did secure a job, and I've been doing that since the 1st of December. And then another door closed recently. Another door closed in the in the dating realm. I got back out into the dating world in August of 2025, and there's been some pitfalls. There's been mistakes that have been made, and what do I do about those mistakes, right? We're going to get into this later in the series, but I take what I call a personal inventory. And what that is where I sit down and I take a look at myself, and I take a look at my part in the situation. I take a look at my behaviors, my patterns of thinking. I take a look at the parts of me that were driving these behaviors and these patterns of thinking. And then what I do is, I talk to other people about it. I'll talk to my therapist about it, because that's how the cycles get broken. And that's how I learn. And that's how I get to take the growth and the lessons and actually carry them forward and not just talk about them. And it's not that mistakes are never going to get made again. I'm a deeply flawed human being. I'm doing the best I can with what I have. But what I found is that if I don't know what the problem is, then the cycles are going to continue. The pain is going to get passed on to other people. And other people are going to get hurt. They don't deserve it. My mind has been changed. My heart has been changed. And I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed. And this is about the journey. It's not about the destination. So I hope that there has been something that I've said in this episode that you've been able to identify with. And I hope that you will join us next week, because next week we're going to talk about finding faith, and I will share my faith story on a much deeper level. And we're going to start diving into some research. Thank you for joining me on This Is Not Supposed to Be Pretty.